The air in Seraphina's was thick with the scent of old money and new fear. It clung to the velvet curtains and settled in the deep grain of the mahogany tables. Julian Vestro owned this air. He did not own the restaurant, not on paper. But the paper did not matter. The owner, a perpetually sweating man named Gianni, understood the truth. Julian Vestro was the gravity that held this place in orbit. Tonight, he sat in his usual alcove, a throne of plush leather set against the back wall. It offered a clear view of the entire dining room, the entrance, the exits. A tactical position. A king's position. Across from him sat Marco, his lieutenant. A man whose loyalty was etched into the lines of his face, as permanent as the scar above his left eye. Marco was quiet. He was always quiet. His job was to watch, to listen, to exist as an extension of Julian's will. Julian swirled the amber liquid in his glass. A 25-year-old single malt. The same drink every Tuesday and Friday for the last 15 years. Routine was a form of armor. Predictability, when you were powerful enough, became a weapon. It told the world you were unshakable. A shadow fell over the table. Not Gianni, who always approached with a bow that was almost a genuflection. Not one of the veteran waiters, who knew to approach only when beckoned. This was a new shadow. Hesitant. Small. Julian did not look up immediately. He watched the shadow's reflection in his whiskey. A flicker of movement. The wringing of hands. He slowly raised his eyes. She was young. Too young for the exhaustion that lived in the fine lines around her eyes. Her waitress uniform, a size too large, could not conceal the gentle swell of her belly. Pregnant. Her gaze darted from Julian to Marco and back again, a cornered animal looking for an escape that wasn't there. Her name tag read Belena. "Sir," she began, her voice a fragile tremor. May I get you something?" Julian placed his empty glass on the table with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence of the alcove. Marco tensed, his hand twitching almost imperceptibly toward the inside of his jacket. "The same," Julian said. His voice was gravel, low and final. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Elena swallowed hard. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her small notepad. She took a shallow breath. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't." The air did not just grow quiet. It ceased to exist. Every background murmur of the restaurant, the clinking of cutlery, the soft music, it all vanished into a vacuum of disbelief. Marco's chair scraped the floor as he began to rise. Gianni was already halfway across the room, his face a mask of pure terror. I cannot serve you more alcohol," Elena stammered, yet her eyes, a deep, familiar shade of hazel, held a flicker of defiance. It's not right." Julian raised a single, steady hand. A simple gesture. Marco froze, halfway to his feet. Gianni stopped dead, his mouth agape. The world restarted, but only on Julian's command. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The defiance was what held him. He had seen it before. A lifetime ago. In a face so similar it stole the breath from his lungs. "Why?" he asked. The word was softer than he intended. She looked down at her own rounded stomach, a protective hand resting upon it. "Because things that cause harm, they shouldn't be celebrated. And I won't be the one to serve it. Not while I'm carrying him." A statement of principle. A suicidal, beautiful, impossible statement of principle, made to the one man in the city to whom no one said no. Julian Vestro, the man they called the ghost, stared at the pregnant waitress who looked so much like a memory he had buried deep in the earth. And for the first time in 2 decades, he felt something other than cold control. He felt a crack in the ice. Stay with me until the end, because the real reason she refused to serve him is a secret that will unravel his entire world, revealing a connection so profound it will force him to choose between the monster he is and the man he was meant to be. If you're enjoying this story, show some love by hitting that like button. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment below letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Now, let's get back to the story. Julian Vestro was a creature of legend, most of it bloody. He had inherited a small, violent piece of the city from his father and, through sheer force of will and a capacity for strategic cruelty, had sculpted it into an empire. His name was not spoken on street corners, it was whispered in boardrooms and back alleys with the same reverent fear. They called him the Ghost for a reason. Problems, rivals, threats, they did not result in messy confrontations. They simply vanished. One day they were a factor in the city's delicate ecosystem, and the next, they were a memory, a cautionary tale. His organization was lean, efficient, and utterly loyal. It operated on a code as strict and unforgiving as Julian himself. His rules were few but absolute. No dealings that preyed on the innocence of children. No trafficking in human misery for sport. And an almost sacred prohibition against harming women unless they themselves took up arms. Betrayal was met with erasure. Disrespect was a debt paid in pain. This code was not born of morality. It was born of pragmatism and a single, searing loss. Her name was Isabella. 21 years ago, Julian Vestro had been a different man. Still dangerous, still ambitious, but with a fire in his heart that had not yet been banked to cold embers. He had loved Isabella Rossi with a ferocity that scared even him. She was a painter, a woman who saw the world in color and light, the absolute antithesis to his world of shadow and gray. She saw the good in him, the man beneath the violence. She believed she could coax him into the light. For 2 years, he had lived a double life. One foot in the world of honor and blood he was building, the other in the simple, sunlit world she created for him. He bought her canvases and paints, sat for hours while she sketched his severe profile, and listened to her talk about a future in a small house by the sea, a future that did not involve the sound of sirens or the weight of a gun. But his world was a jealous one. It did not allow for such departures. The end came on a rainy Tuesday. A rival family had broken the truce. Blood had been spilled. Julian had done what was necessary, what his position demanded. He had come home to her with the scent of cordite and iron on his hands and a look in his eyes that she had never seen before. The look of a killer who had just reaffirmed his nature. She did not scream or cry. Her disappointment was a quiet, devastating thing. "I cannot build a life on a foundation of graves, Julian," she had told him, her voice steady despite the tears tracking through the charcoal dust on her cheeks. "I love the man you are when you are with me. But I cannot live with the man you have to be when you are not." She left the next day. No note. Just an empty space in his bed and a silence in his penthouse apartment that screamed louder than any gunshot. She had taken nothing but her art and a small silver locket he had given her. Julian had searched for her? He had used all his formidable resources. But Isabella Rossi had vanished as completely as one of his own enemies. She had not wanted to be found, and out of a final, painful act of love, he had respected her wish. He had never loved again. The part of him that was capable of such a thing had been cauterized, shut away. He replaced it with rules, with control, with the relentless pursuit of power. He still carried his own silver locket, a perfect match to the one she took, but he never, ever opened it. The man she loved was inside that locket, and Julian Vestro, the ghost, could not afford to let him out. Now, this girl, Elena. The resemblance was unnerving. It was not just the hazel eyes or the curve of her jaw. It was the spirit. That quiet, unbreakable defiance. The simple, unshakable belief in what was right. It was Isabella, reincarnated in a cheap waitress uniform, carrying a child and looking at him with the same moral clarity that had broken his heart 2 decades ago. Elena Rossi did not know any of this. For her, life was a series of mounting anxieties. She had arrived in the city 6 months prior, running from a dead-end town and the suffocating pity of neighbors. Her mother, Isabella, had passed away a year before from a sudden illness, leaving Elena utterly alone. Her mother had rarely spoken of the past, or of Elena's father, a man she described only as a brief, beautiful mistake. All Elena had were her mother's old paintings and a fierce determination to build a life for the child growing inside her. The pregnancy was a secret she held close, the result of a single, desperate night. After her mother's death, consumed by grief, she had met a man in a quiet, darkened bar. A stranger. He was older, with sad eyes and a stillness that felt like a port in her storm of sorrow. They didn't exchange names. They had shared a few hours of quiet understanding, a fleeting connection that was more about shared loneliness than passion. She had left before sunrise, ashamed and yet strangely comforted. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. She had no idea that the sad-eyed stranger was Julian Vestro, mourning the 20th anniversary of the day her own mother had left him. A cosmic, tragic coincidence. Now, she worked double shifts at Serafina's, her feet aching, her back a constant throb of pain. The tips were barely enough to cover the rent on her small, crumbling apartment. The building was owned by a man named Rico, a small-time loan shark with greasy hair and eyes that lingered on her body in a way that made her skin crawl. He knew she was pregnant. He knew she was alone. Last week, he had cornered her in the hallway. He had told her not to worry about the late rent. He would take care of her. He had put a hand on her belly, his thumb stroking the taut fabric of her dress. A pretty girl like you, you're gonna need a man to look after you and the kid. I can be that man. The threat was veiled, but the meaning was clear. He was trying to claim her. Her and her child. Elena lived in a state of quiet dread, trapped between exhaustion and fear. Her refusal to serve Julian Vestro was not a calculated act of bravery. It was a spontaneous eruption of her core principles, the last thing she felt she had any control over. In a world of compromise and fear, she had drawn a line in the sand over a glass of whiskey, with no idea she had drawn it at the feet of the one man who could either destroy her completely or become her unlikely salvation. The silence in the alcove stretched for an eternity. Gianni the owner looked as if he might faint. Marco's posture was rigid, a coiled spring of violence waiting for a single word. Julian simply watched Elena. He saw the tremor in her hands, but also the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw her fear, but he saw her resolve more. It was like looking at a ghost. Isabella's ghost. His mind, usually a cold, calculating machine, was a maelstrom of memory and shock. The hazel eyes. The defiant tilt of her chin. The name on her mother's death certificate, Isabella Rossi. Marco's initial report had been sitting on his desk. He hadn't connected the waitress to that file until this very moment. Rossi. And the other memory. The one from a few months back. A dark bar. The anniversary. A night he allowed himself a single crack in his armor of solitude. A woman with sad eyes and a quiet soul. He had sought anonymous comfort, a brief respite from the ghost of Isabella. He never saw her face clearly in the gloom. He never asked her name. Could it be? Could the universe be that cruel, or that kind? His internal conflict was a war on two fronts. The boss, the ghost, demanded order. This girl had broken the cardinal rule of his world, she had shown him public disrespect. An example had to be made. Weakness could not be perceived. But the man, the one locked away with the memory of a painter and a sunlit room, felt a powerful, undeniable pull. A protective instinct so fierce it shocked him. This wasn't about business. This was about the echo of a love he thought was dead. It was about the impossible possibility that the child she carried. He could not finish the thought. It was too monumental. He watched her standing there, a lone soldier defending a hill no one else could see. He saw the worn-out soles of her shoes. He saw the faint shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. He saw dignity. A dignity that his money and power could not buy. In that moment, a choice was made. Not with logic, but with something far older and more powerful. Julian Vestro leaned back in his chair. The movement was slow, deliberate. It broke the tension. He looked at the terrified Gianni. "Johnny," he said, his voice back to its normal low rumble. "This young lady has integrity. A rare commodity. See that she is not penalized for it." Johnny blinked, uncomprehending. "Mr. Vestro, she refused." "I am aware of what she did," Julian cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I am telling you to commend her. From now on, she waits on my table exclusively. And she will bring me sparkling water with a slice of lemon." He turned his gaze back to Elena. Her expression was one of profound shock. "Is that acceptable to your principles?" Julian asked. She nodded dumbly, unable to form words. "Good," he said. He then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off not one, but 10 $100 bills and placed them neatly on the table. "For the inconvenience." He stood, Marco instantly moving with him. "We're leaving," he said to his lieutenant. He walked past Elena without another glance, but as he passed, he spoke one more sentence, so low only she could hear it. "Courage should be rewarded." He swept out of the restaurant, leaving behind $1,000, a stunned waitress, a relieved owner, and a dozen unanswered questions that hung in the air like smoke. Once inside the armored sedan, the silence was heavy. Marco drove, his eyes on the road, but Julian could feel his subordinate's confusion. "Marco," Julian said, staring out at the blurred city lights. "Boss?" "The girl." "Elena. I want to know everything." "I already have the preliminary file on your desk, boss." "Elena Rossi. New in town." "Not that," Julian interrupted. "I want more. I want to know where she sleeps. I want to know who she talks to. I want to know what she fears. I want to know the name of her mother." He paused. "And I want you to find out who owned the building she lives in." The past tense is intentional. Marco glanced at him in the rearview mirror. A flicker of understanding, mixed with surprise. This was not business. This was personal. "You want me to acquire it?" "I want the deed on my desk by morning," Julian commanded. "And Marco, be invisible. I don't want her to know she has a guardian angel. I just want her to feel the turbulence stop." Marco nodded. "Consider it done, boss." Julian leaned his head back against the cool leather. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he did not see the face of Isabella as she left. He saw the face of Elena, defiant and proud. And he felt the terrifying, exhilarating pull of a destiny he thought he had long since escaped. The ghost was about to become very, very solid. The next 48 hours moved with the silent, deadly efficiency of a predator closing in on its prey. While Julian went about his normal business, a ghost army of lawyers, investigators, and enforcers moved at his command. Marco's full report landed on Julian's desk by noon the next day. It was concise and brutal in its clarity. Elena Rossi, daughter of Isabella Rossi, deceased. The confirmation hit Julian like a physical blow. He had to sit down. He stared at the name, the ink on the page seeming to mock him. Isabella was gone. Truly gone. A grief he had suppressed for 2 decades washed over him, fresh and raw. The report continued. It detailed Elena's financial struggles, her isolation. And then it detailed Rico Ferraro. Rico was a bottom feeder. A parasite who thrived on the desperation of others. He wasn't part of any real organization. He was a lone wolf who was tolerated because he stayed in his lane, preying on those too weak to fight back. The report included transcripts of Rico's thinly veiled threats to Elena, his disgusting proposition. He had violated 2 of Julian's most sacred rules. He preyed on the weak. And he had put his hands on a woman who, Julian now felt with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, was carrying his child. The deed to Elena's apartment building was beside the report. The previous owner had been made an offer so far beyond the property's value that he had signed it over in the middle of the night, no questions asked. The transfer was already complete. Julian Vestro now owned the building where Rico Ferraro thought he was king. The plan formed in Julian's mind instantly. It was not complex. It was not a game of chess. It was the simple, final act of removing a piece of filth from the board. That evening, Julian sat in his penthouse, the city lights spread out below him like a carpet of fallen stars. He held the report in one hand and a glass of sparkling water in the other. He hadn't touched whiskey since that night. Marco entered the room. He's at his office. As expected. How many men does he have? Julian asked, not taking his eyes off the city. 2. Amateurs. 1 on the door, 1 inside. We take 2 of ours, Julian said. No firearms. This is not a hit. It is an education. Marco nodded. And you, boss? You're coming? It was a rare question. Julian hadn't personally handled something this low-level in a decade. Julian finally turned from the window. His eyes were cold steel. I am delivering the lesson myself. Rico's office was a grimy, smoke-filled room above a failing pawn shop. The air smelled of stale cigars and desperation. The man on the door was a large, slovenly thug who was more bluster than muscle. He saw 4 well-dressed men approaching and moved to block the stairs. Private club, he grunted. Marco didn't break stride. He moved with a liquid grace that was terrifying to behold. One hand came up to brace the man's jaw, the other delivered a short, precise strike to the solar plexus. The thug folded silently, unconscious before he hit the dirty floor. Julian's other 2 men caught him and laid him gently in the shadows. They ascended the stairs without a sound. Rico was sitting behind a cheap metal desk, counting a pile of crumpled bills. His other guard was slouched in a chair, watching a small television. He didn't even have time to register the door opening before he was lifted from his chair and neutralized with the same silent, brutal efficiency. Rico looked up, his greasy smile fading into a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. He saw Julian Vestro standing in the doorway, flanked by men who moved like shadows. It was like seeing a character from a horror story step into his life. Vestro, Rico stammered, scrambling to his feet. I don't understand. We have no business. I pay my dues. Sit down, Rico, Julian said. The command was quiet, but it had the force of a physical blow. Rico collapsed back into his chair. Julian walked slowly across the room, his expensive leather shoes silent on the linoleum floor. He stopped in front of the desk and looked down at the pathetic man. He felt no anger. Only a cold, surgical disgust. We are going to have a conversation about your business practices, Julian began, his voice calm. Specifically, your tenant relations. Rico's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Let me be more specific, Julian said, leaning forward and placing his hands flat on the desk. Elena Rossi. Rico's eyes widened in terror. The waitress? She's a nobody. Just some girl who was behind on her rent, I swear. I was gonna give her a break. You were going to claim her, Julian corrected him, his voice dropping even lower. You put your filthy hands on her. You thought because she was alone, because she was pregnant, she was yours for the taking. Julian straightened up. In my world, Rico, we have rules. We have a code. We do not prey on the vulnerable. We do not terrorize women. It is a sign of weakness. It is a lack of honor. You have no honor. He slid a document across the desk. The deed. As of 3 o'clock this morning, I own this building, Julian stated flatly. And all the others on this block. Which means you are no longer a landlord. You are a trespasser. Rico stared at the paper, his mind unable to process the speed and finality of it all. But why? For some waitress. Julian picked up a cheap pen from Rico's desk, turning it over in his fingers. You made the mistake of thinking she was a nobody. You were wrong. Her mother was a woman of quality. A woman of grace. By harassing her daughter, you disrespected a memory that is very important to me. He snapped the pen in half with a sharp crack. This is what happens now, Julian said, the ice in his voice dropping to absolute zero. You are going to pack a bag. You are going to leave this city tonight. Your operations are finished. Your assets are forfeit. You will not contact anyone. You will simply disappear. Rico was shaking, tears of fear mixing with the sweat on his face. And if I don't? Julian smiled, but it was a terrifying sight, devoid of all warmth. Then you will learn, in a very permanent way, why they call me the ghost. He turned and walked to the door, Marco and his men falling in behind him. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the broken man. You will never speak the name Elena Rossi again. You will not think it. It will be erased from your mind. Do you understand me? Rico could only nod, a pathetic, trembling gesture. Julian left without another word. The problem of Rico Ferraro was solved. The file was permanently closed. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Julian took a deep breath. This wasn't business. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. A concept he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for a very long time. Julian did not rush. He let the effects of his intervention settle like dust. The next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Elena's apartment. Inside, she found the official deed to her unit, signed over to her, free and clear. There was no name, no explanation. Just a small, typed note that read, "A safe harbor for a new beginning." She stared at the documents, her mind reeling. It was impossible. A miracle. She thought it was a mistake, but a call to the city records office confirmed it. The apartment was hers. The crushing weight of Rico and the rent vanished in an instant. At the restaurant, Gianni treated her with a baffling level of deference. He gave her the easiest station, told her to take breaks whenever she felt tired, and ensured her shifts were the shortest and most lucrative. Her tips mysteriously doubled, thanks to a few anonymous patrons who seemed to only dine when she was working and always left $100 bills. Elena was overwhelmed, confused, but for the first time in a year, she could breathe. The constant hum of anxiety was replaced by a tentative sense of peace. She didn't know where this incredible good fortune was coming from, but she accepted it as a gift from a universe that had finally decided to show her some kindness. Julian watched from a distance. He saw the tension leave her shoulders. He saw the return of a soft light to her eyes. He saw her buy new, comfortable shoes. He had his driver follow her to a doctor's appointment and paid the bill in cash before she even got to the receptionist's desk. He was a phantom, weaving a net of safety and security around her without ever showing his face. Finally, after a week, he decided it was time. He waited for her after her shift, standing by his car parked down the street from Serafina's. She emerged, rubbing her lower back, and stopped when she saw him. Fear flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by confusion. "Mr. Vestro," she said, her voice cautious. "Elena," he replied, his tone gentle. "Walk with me." It was not a command, but she found herself falling into step beside him as he began to walk slowly down the quiet street. "Things have been better for you, I hope," he said. She looked at him, suspicion dawning. "The apartment. The money at work. That was you? Why?" Julian stopped under a street lamp, its soft glow illuminating his face. He looked older, more tired than he did in the restaurant. "I knew your mother," he said simply. Elena's heart skipped a beat. "You knew Isabella?" "A very long time ago," he confirmed. "She was important to me. When I learned she had passed, and that you were her daughter, and that you were in trouble, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. It wouldn't have been right." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. Tears of relief, of grief, of 1,000 emotions she couldn't name. I don't know how to thank you. I have no money to pay you back for the apartment." "You have already paid me back," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she didn't understand. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small, worn silver locket. With a click, he opened it. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a young woman with laughing eyes and a smudge of paint on her cheek. It was Isabella. "She gave me this," Julian said softly. "She believed I could be a better man than I was. For a long time, I thought she was wrong. But seeing you, seeing her spirit in you, it reminded me of that belief. You gave me something back that I thought was lost forever. That is worth more than any building, any amount of money." Elena stared at the locket, at the face of her young mother, and then at the feared, powerful man who held it with such reverence. The stories she'd heard, the whispers about the ghost, they didn't align with the man standing before her. "Who are you?" she asked, the question raw and honest. "People in this city, they are terrified of you. They say you are a bad man. But all you have shown me is kindness. You saved me." Julian looked away from her, his gaze settling on the swell of her stomach, now more pronounced. The question he had been afraid to voice now demanded an answer. "I have been many things in my life, Elena," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. "Most of them not good. But for your mother's daughter, and for her grandchild, I want to try to be the man she always hoped I could be." He took a deep breath, the confession feeling like tearing himself open. That night. A few months ago. In a bar downtown. A woman consumed by grief, and a man mourning a memory. Elena's eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. The sad-eyed stranger. The quiet comfort. The face she never saw clearly. It couldn't be. "That was me, Elena," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was. But the baby you are carrying," he finally met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a terrifying vulnerability. "The baby is mine." The world tilted on its axis. The quiet street, the hum of the city, it all faded away. There was only the staggering, impossible truth hanging in the air between them. Julian didn't move closer. He didn't demand. He simply stood there, exposed. "I will not force myself into your life, or our child's life," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its strength. "You have your freedom. You have your home. You owe me nothing. But I am making you a promise. You will never be alone again. You and our child will be safe. You will have everything you could ever need or want. All you have to do is let me." He reached into his pocket and produced a simple, elegant business card. It was blank except for a single phone number. "This is my private line. It is always with me. If you need anything, at any time, you call. If you decide you want me to be a father to our child, you call." He placed the card in her trembling hand, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second. "The choice is yours, Elena. Completely." And with that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving her standing under the lonely street lamp with the deed to a new life in one hand, and the key to an impossible future in the other. 2 years passed. The world kept turning. The city's underbelly still churned with its secrets and its dangers, but a profound shift had occurred in its center of gravity. The garden was bathed in the warm light of a late afternoon sun. Roses, cultivated with a tender care, climbed a stone wall. In the center of a perfectly manicured lawn, a little boy with dark, curly hair and familiar hazel eyes chased after a bright red ball, his laughter echoing in the peaceful air. His name was Leo. Elena sat on a white bench, a soft smile on her face. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a deep, settled contentment. She was no longer a waitress running from a lonely past. She was a mother, a painter, her work now celebrated in a small, exclusive gallery downtown, and the anchor of a world she never could have imagined. A large, masculine hand came to rest on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. Julian Vestro knelt on the grass, his expensive suit trousers be damned. He caught the red ball as Leo toddled into his arms, giggling. Julian lifted his son into the air, and the sound that came from him was not the gravelly murmur of a Mafia boss, but the pure, unadulterated joy of a father. He had kept his promise. After a week of stunned silence, Elena had called the number. Not for money, not for protection, but for answers. He had given them to her, honestly and without reservation. He told her about his life, about her mother, about the man he was and the man he was trying to become for her and for their son. He had not moved into her life. He had built a new one around it. A sprawling but quiet estate on the edge of the city, a fortress of peace. He was still Julian Vestro, the ghost. The city still feared his name. But here, in this garden, he was just Julian. He was Dad. His office, once a stark monument to cold power, had been transformed. The dark wood and leather remained, but the room was softened by the intrusion of life. On the corner of his massive desk, next to encrypted phones and sensitive business files, sat a small, clay handprint, painted a messy, vibrant blue. Beside it, a framed photograph had replaced the stacks of ledgers, Elena, Leo, and him, sitting on the grass, squinting in the sun. A family. The old silver locket he used to carry was gone from his neck. It now sat in a velvet-lined box on his bookshelf. It remained open, the faded picture of a young Isabella forever watching over a newer, brighter photograph of her daughter and her grandson. A bridge between the past and the present. A testament to a love that had, in its own way, finally found its happy ending. Marco still stood guard, but now his duties often included chasing down stray soccer balls or standing by as Julian pushed his son on a swing, a small, incredulous smile sometimes touching his lips. The boss had changed. The empire was more stable, more powerful than ever, but its king had found a different reason to rule, not for control, but for preservation. A man is not solely defined by the darkness of the world he commands, nor by the violence he is capable of. He is ultimately defined by the choices he makes when his heart is laid bare, when innocence and a long-lost love ask him to be more than his reputation. Julian Vestro had built an empire on fear and shadows, a ghost haunting the city he ran. But the quiet defiance of one woman, and the unexpected gift of a son, had called him out of the darkness. He learned that true power was not in making enemies disappear, but in choosing to appear for the ones you love. And in the end, the most ruthless of men found his redemption not in a blaze of glory, but in the simple, profound act of becoming a father.